Today's guest has written a charming new picture book on Venerable Jerome Lejeune, the doctor who devoted his career to God's children with Down syndrome. Stay with us.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host, and today I'm talking with educator and homeschool veteran Ana Braga-Henebry about her beautiful new picture book on Venerable Jerome Lejeune. Welcome back to the program, Ana.
It is such a joy to be back here. Thank you so much again for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I just want to mention, and I have it in the show notes, that we interviewed you a while back about fostering religious vocations in the family. It's beautiful. It's episode 54. So I have the link there in the show notes. And we had such a good conversation, Ana. You have such a joyful spirit. So it's just nice to be back with you again. Everybody, you're going to love Ana. But first, for anyone who just hasn't happened to have heard of the great Catholic doctor Jerome Lejeune, just give us a snapshot of who he was and what makes him so important to us as Catholics.
Yes, I grew up knowing about him, and I expected that people here everybody would know about him, and I quickly understood that not to be the case. And I believe maybe it's because my parents lived in France before I was born. My mom was actually educated in primary school in a French school. So they were fluent in French. They lived in French. One of my brothers was born in France. And maybe that's why, and also growing up in a South America country where we had a lot of French culture. Maybe that's the reason. I've always known about him. He is considered by many to be the father of modern genetics because it was really landmark scientific discovery work that he did when he looked in the microscope and found the chromosomal reasons that make up Down syndrome. And so it just, he was the first one to know there were 3 chromosomes on chromosome 21 as opposed to 2. And so that's what he became, just overnight known all over the world. And of course, what we're bringing here is that he, besides being a scientist, he was a wonderful, holy family man and now a venerable of the Catholic Church.
So exciting. I'm just so thrilled. We have a number of scientists who have been at least saints or at least recognized as holy innovators in the church. The church has a wonderful history of scientific discovery and support of, the scientific method came out of the monastery system. So just for anyone listening who may be new to homeschooling and never heard that before, because so many atheists out there or people who are anti-Catholic will say that the church is anti-science. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so we have this incredibly rich history. But you've written now a beautiful picture book that makes Dr. Lejeune's holy life and his scientific achievements accessible now to kids, which I love it. So just step us into what inspired you to even begin this project.
This is the story that I think I'm here to tell because, since the book came out and it was this past May, so it hasn't even been a year, my life changed in a way because now I get, both at my parish level and of course through social media and the internet, I get emails and messages and people coming to me saying how much they love the book. And it's usually because they have in their family or in their circle of friends a child or a young adult with Down syndrome. And so they think it's wonderful that, that there is a book talking about this great doctor who made such a big difference in their lives, in the life of the families of people with individuals with Down syndrome. So I have had a number of book signings, as you can imagine, with, a new book coming out. People are sometimes it's even a fundraising event. But I always tell people, I don't care where you buy the book. I'm always happy to dedicate it and sign it for you. But especially in events, people ask me, what's the story? How did this book come around? And so this is a story that I will be so happy to have the link to this podcast to be able to send to people who ask, because then I will tell you here the story. And it's really a story about how when we are willing to do God's work, he uses us as his instruments, because that's the only reason I can explain how the whole thing came about. And I'm going to go back to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I grew up in Rio. I was seventh of 10 children. And the conversations around the dinner time, my siblings and I like to say that that's where we learned everything.
Mm-hmm.
Homeschooling didn't really exist, but our schools in Brazil, in South America, as in a lot of the world, they were half day. And my parents were very well-read people. We have a house lined with books everywhere, which is not typical in South America. And at dinner time, the conversations you name it. My mom would tell stories about books she read or movies she read or travels they did. My father was a steel engineer and traveled quite a bit. And whenever he could, he would take my mom with him. And she would come back telling us the whole history of, the medieval origins of whatever place in Europe she had visited, and show us slides. There would be slide projections and would call friends and relatives. It was such a culturally rich life. One of the subjects, and here I am, one of the younger ones, so I'm just soaking all this in and absorbing, and one of the subjects that would recur around the table constantly was science, anything related to science. My father was an engineer. Two of my brothers followed him in engineering and science. I have a brother who actually came to Harvard-Smithsonian for his doctorate in astrophysics and has been working with the National Space Research Institute in Brazil ever since. So there was a great interest in scientific things. So I think I learned a lot of what I'm not a scientist, but I learned two things. First, that science is fascinating and wonderful and beautiful, and definitely fodder for wonderful family conversations and discoveries. And second, that there is no conflict. You can love science and love God. And the conflict between science and faith, for me, I always felt like it was something made up, because I grew up knowing that, my father, whom I loved and admired and who loved science, was on his knees, on Sunday Mass, receiving communion and having a beautiful, faithful life. Excuse me. So fast forward, I finished my education in Brazil. I came to graduate school in the United States. I was almost fluent in English already. I did not have the language barrier that sometimes happens with immigrants, because my father was educated in the English school, a British school. So we also had French and English at home. But anyway, I met my husband, who became a scientist. And so the dinner conversations about science continued as we raised our 7 kids. So I've always known, So then fast forward some more, and I had 25 years of homeschooling the kids, and they went off their ways, and now they're having children. So all of a sudden, I'm a school teacher, post-homeschooling, Catholic school, and I have grandchildren. And so for the first time, I'm buying and looking at books with the eyes of, I want to read this to my grandchildren or give it to their parents, because what better, gift is there in the world than books. And so I start noticing that we do have books about science, even for babies, Einstein for babies, quantum mechanics for babies, and all kinds of things for babies. None of them from a Catholic publisher. I remember I started talking to Stacy Trazancos, who helped me write the book, the science parts. She was so helpful and loving towards me. We've been friends for a long time, and I acknowledged her in the book. And I said, Stacy, you need to write like a series of books for babies, coming from the point that we can be a good, faithful Catholic and love science and admire science and talk about scientists and all kinds of science subjects. And so I noticed that lack of, little books for kids about scientists or science in general. And then my sister, my little sister is a Benedictine professed nun in the Bavaria in Germany. And she and I share a Kindle account because it's hard for her to get English books there to read, and she's a voracious reader. So one of the books we got was the new biography published by Ignatius Press on Jerome Lejeune. So my sister and I both read pretty much at the same time the new biography that I highly recommend, published by Ignatius, is written by the postulator of his cause. So this woman knows everything that there is to know, and she writes beautifully. I have to say, I love reading biographies, and that's one of the most beautiful biographies I've ever read in my life. So after that, I was teaching Latin in 2 Catholic schools, and my classes were very lively, and I'm always telling the kids, like, what are you up to? What's new in your life? And I always start with something that's going on. So I wanted to show them pictures or something for kids about Jerome Lejeune. And so innocent, naive me goes to the the Catholic school library looking for a book about him. And I said to the principal later, before I left that library that morning, I realized that I was already writing this book in my mind. Because what I found out is there's absolutely nothing written about him for kids, period. No matter what publisher. Not only that, but there was really nothing about scientists and science by any Catholic publisher in that, there were a few of these secular published biographies for kids about scientists, very few. So I thought, I've got to write his story because I was so excited about getting to know him through that biography. So that's how the story came to be. So anyway, I came home and I started writing the book, and I think it took me just a few weeks. I actually had a professional editor look at it. I had the ready thing. And then I talked to Stacy. We had the idea of sending to a publisher, a Catholic publisher, and I heard nothing. It just, you send things to publishers and you hear nothing back. And I'm sure everyone who has been in my place know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, I'm also a contributing writer for Well Read Mom, the National Catholic Book Club for Women, which is another love of my life. And I was off to the conference. They have an annual conference where we have different speakers, but most of all, we see other people. And so, of course, one of the conversations I had during the conference with Carla is the editor of whatever I write for Well Read Mom. She goes over it. So it was fun to be in person with her, give her a big hug. And I told her, Carla, I wrote a kid's book about Jerome Lejeune, and I'm so excited about it. I think it's, we want kids to know about him. And I just, on the train on my way here to the conference, I got a letter of rejection from this major Catholic publisher. And she looked at me, she said, well, our keynote speaker at this conference is Haley Stewart. And guess what she's looking for? She just took over as the kids' book editor for Word on Fire. And she's looking for good quality kids' books that are relevant to today's Catholic kids. And so, believe it or not, I came home, I presented, she helped me through the process of submitting a book. And in a matter of few weeks, the book was in the hands of Word on Fire. They were the ones who found the illustrator, and it all went from there.
That's just beautiful. I love the way God opens the doors and the way he, as you said, it's important to understand the story, the genesis of your appreciation for and your enthusiasm for great conversations with kids about science and other lots of other subjects. And so it's just beautiful to see that in context, the way God connected the dots over time and brought you to this point. I want to hear lots more after we take a quick break, Ana, about how, as a lifelong educator and a veteran homeschooler, you see that his story connecting into our home education as Catholics. So everybody stay tuned. Lots more. Such a rich conversation with Ana Braga-Henebry talking about her beautiful new picture book on Venerable Jerome Lejeune from Word on Fire. Wow. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
All right, we are back with Ana Braga-Henebry, and we're talking about her amazing new picture book on Venerable Jerome Lejeune. And I say amazing just because the Holy Spirit connected the dots and brought this about in such beautiful ways. And I want to come back to, Ana, you're a lifelong educator, and you've homeschooled your children for 25 years. So you really understand who's listening here. And so just help us connect the dots. Dr. Lejeune's story is rich with connections potentially to our education at home and in all the things that we do. Would you speak to that?
Yes, of course. I love picture books. And I have to start by saying this. One of the things my husband and I do, and we didn't do this through our homeschooling life because, for one thing, we didn't have TV for most of it. But we watch Jeopardy every night, and I'm always threatening him that I'm going to send him, and he's going to make all this money and solve all of our debts problems. And we always laugh about it because he can answer everything better than the candidates can, the players of the game. But anyway. There was this huge champion a while back, I think a couple of years ago. And in one of the interviews, they asked him, how do you prepare for Jeopardy? How do you know so many things? And he looked at him and he said, I go to the kids section in the public library and I get the informational picture books. And I was like, because I always say, our weekly trips to the public library and coming home with all these beautifully illustrated nonfiction picture books really, truly is one of the reasons the kids are so well read, and there's just a plethora of different historical, geographical, scientific, and you name it, things we learned by reading picture books. So I think there is definitely a wonderful place in the homeschool family for picture books because, they should be well illustrated. And I love the fact that Word on Fire is committed to quality publishing. All of their books are beautifully illustrated. So the illustrator for my book was a young Italian artist that they work with. And I cried when I first saw the first draft of the illustrations because it was almost like she came into my mind and knew what was there. One thing I did that my editor said that helped with the process is I wrote detailed suggestions for illustrator, like he could be holding the book, sitting on a couch and looking out the window type thing, down to what I was really imagining.
Nice.
And of course, we are on a audio podcast, so I can't show you pictures, but whenever I'm talking about it in one of the many book signings I have, I always open the book and show them some of my favorite pictures. Well, the very first one has Jerome Lejeune and his brother when they were little. And this is Second World War in France, and the schools were closed. They couldn't go to school. And their dad said, well, just because schools are closed, that doesn't mean we're going to stop learning. So the dad took over their lessons, and they read books, and they learned a lot. And during that time, his biographer tells us, is when he started thinking about studying medicine and pursuing, a career where really a scientist is someone who's always learning, right? I see that from my husband. That's what academia is in the end, is someone who is always willing to be learning what's new. So that's one of the favorite, that wonderful picture of the little boy holding onto a book, looking out the window. You can just see in his eyes what he's already imagining, and how that period in life where they couldn't go to school, but they had a father and the many books. His father read all the classics to the boys, and they, their life was enriched and propelled forward from a loving father who didn't decide to stop education just because schools were closed. Mm-hmm. So I do think that, there are many pictures in the book that are like my favorites. And I think after this one that I mentioned to you, there is one. So his funeral mass was at Notre Dame in Paris. There were tens of thousands of people. He got so well known during his lifetime. And during the funeral mass, a young man with Down syndrome stood up and spoke in a loud and clear voice. "Thank you, Dr. Lejeune. Because of you, I am proud of who I am." And that every time that I mention that picture, I get emotional, because I think that young man personified how Dr. Lejeune, now Venerable Jerome Lejeune, changed the world for the families of kids with Down syndrome. There was a lot of ignorance before. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of guilt. Parents thought they did something wrong. And so he came to say, these are human beings with dignity, just like all of us. They are loved by God. They're supposed to be treated with love and dignity, and it is nobody's fault. It's a random genetic occurrence. So, for us talking about it now, it's like, yeah, we know that, but at that time, it was a huge, huge change for the world.
Yes. And I noticed when I was just looking online at some of the illustrations, and I saw that image of the boy standing up in the cathedral and saying that he was proud of himself or who he was. And I also noticed as I was looking at the illustrations that the artist has made it clear which faces in the book are children with Down syndrome, and they're beautiful faces. It's subtle and it's quite beautifully done. So I was very touched by that too. So I can understand why you have, been moved by that. And I'm thinking too, listening to his story, it's a homeschooling story, right? Its roots of his excitement about medicine began in that period of homeschooling with his father. And we can also talk about the leadership, the spiritual headship of the father and the power of that. We can talk about biology, pro-life issues, even family life and vocations. And again, our pride as a church, humble pride in it, the church's fostering of science.
And I can definitely pick up where you're bringing up on the pro-life issue. So Dr. Lejeune suffered enormously for his discoveries. So it happened that after, he was very well known in the scientific world overnight, because his discoveries were really new, and to this day we're benefiting from understanding chromosomes and so many other conditions and other syndromes that are also on the chromosome level. But anyway, it was very well known that he was going to get the next Nobel Prize of medicine. It was in everybody. It was just like there was nobody else that could possibly get it. But excuse me, he came to the United States to receive an award, and he was giving a speech in San Francisco. I did not include all this in the book because I'm keeping in mind that this is a book for kids, and for any kids growing up and wanting to learn more, they're going to come across all this once they investigate his life better, or if they're in high school and read the biography. So in that speech, it came up that his what he was responding to was the fact that his discoveries made it also possible for prenatal testing. And so people could now know ahead of time if they were going to have a baby with Down syndrome. And what we know is, presented itself as a choice people could make during that pregnancy, right? So in that speech, he made it very clearly that he thought the job of doctors and scientists was not to eliminate life, but to protect life, to bring healing, to bring cures, to respect humanity and every human being and all of that. And that night in his hotel room, this is before emails, this is before texting or Zoom, he wrote a letter to his wife. And it's funny because I remember when my dad would go out of the country and we would get letters from my dad to my mom. So I can see what that is. Now we forget people wrote letters. He wrote a letter to his wife and he said, tonight, during my speech, I lost my Nobel Prize. I'll never get it. Because he saw what the audience was not responding well to what he said. And I bring that in the book too, for the rest of his life. He promoted life and dignity. He promoted that the job of the scientists and of the doctors is to promote life, to defend life, to protect life, to bring healing, to bring cure, and not to think that we can be in God's place and decide who's going to live and who is not going to live.
Right.
And he did a wonderful job defending that on TVs. He was on TV all the time, debating people. But he was always so kind and generous, respectful. He was never, the way he debated disarmed people because he was so holy and faithful.
Yeah, he rejected, in a sense, the golden calf for the real thing. He wasn't blinded by the honor that was surely coming his way if he would just bend the knee a little bit or just leave something out. He was someone courageous and very much deserves to be a venerable in the church and to have his life be studied and emulated and hopefully inspire generations of courageous young people. Because I feel like young people, they don't want lukewarm examples or to be patronized. They love the images. I remember the kids that used to come and play at our house when my daughter was little. They loved hearing the Bible stories about life and death struggles. And so that kind of courage is quite stirring and important to our children.
Yeah, what you brought up is exactly what happened to him, because overnight his funding pretty much disappeared.
Wow.
So actually it was some United States organizations that kept funding him and promoting him. He was very thankful to a lot of people in the United States. And he came here a lot. And actually, that is in the book, in the author's note, my husband and I met him at a conference, which was another personal reason I wanted to tell everyone about his story. We were sitting at a conference this was not even a year before he died. As soon as he got back to France, he was diagnosed and he died. That's femur. So, wow. And he just had these joyful blue eyes. We had our little 1-year-old with us because he was still nursing. We had lunch together at the same banquet table. It's a very big conference. And so I wish that it was the time when we all have our iPhones with us and I have a picture of me with him, but there was no camera, but it is imprinted in my mind and heart. We never forgot meeting him, because as soon as lunch was kind of done, he got up and he said, "Excuse me," and he went and gave the keynote, huge speech to the entire conference. And it was one, I actually have the cassette tape from that talk with me to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the cassette tapes and all the talks, and the huge difference it made in our lives to be able to share those talks for people who couldn't attend. Amazing. And what a gift to have met him. That's an eternal friendship. I have no doubt he's praying for you, praying for this book, praying for the readers, maybe even the listeners of this conversation. What are you hearing back from people who are reading the book to their children? What kinds of feedback are you getting? Is it too early to know, or are you hearing stuff?
So glad you asked. No, the publisher is very happy about the way the book is doing. And of course, it's a book for the future, because as his cause progresses, there will be more interest, for people to look for materials about him for kids. Excuse me. And what of course, the parents and families of special needs children have loved this book. You cannot imagine how many have come to me and said, "I'm so glad there's a beautiful book for sometimes it's grandchildren, nieces, children of friends, whoever it is, like before Christmas, so many people bought this book to give to their friends as gifts so they can have a better understanding of what Down syndrome is. And of course, and I think another factor of what, so many things brought me to write this or brought God to help me put this out was that we have a special needs grandson. And he has a syndrome that is not Down syndrome, but there are some things in common. And actually, my daughter says sometimes she's out and about with him and people think he has Down syndrome because his syndrome is very rare and Down syndrome is more well known. But anyway, I'm part of a family that has a kid with special needs and with a rare condition. So I know how that is. And so I'm really reaching out to the families and I think the illustrations, like you said, that's a huge thing. People always say how the illustrator portrayed the kids with Down syndrome in such a gentle and kind way. We were so pleased with that. That's just a really, the cover of the book tells it all. They're surrounding the doctor with, just expressing love and gratitude to him. Because he continued being a pediatrician all his life. So he saw kids in his office, doctor's office in the morning, and in the afternoon he would work on his research.
Yeah. And I've noticed there are sadly, so few Down syndrome children around, or even children with other kinds of disabilities, obvious disabilities, where parents have clearly made a pro-life decision, right? They've made the right choice, and they're bringing these children who can sometimes be very challenging to manage in church and things like that. So I try to make a point to go up to them and just thank them for bringing their beautiful child to Mass. Mm-hmm. They need to know that the church loves them and is happy to see them.
Yes. At church, we do see more of them than elsewhere, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, so wonderful. As we're just starting to wrap up, Ana, is there anything else about his story that you want to make sure you mention today?
One of the pictures that I love is the picture when they're at home having a family dinner. Family dinners, I think, are so integral to the family life, just the fact that you sit down around the table to have dinner. But they were the kind of family that would always pull another chair and make more room because his students loved him. And so they wanted to come over and spend more time with him and hear more things he had to say. So just that, the fact that he is a venerable, a holy man, but also a family man with a wife and kids, and just welcoming people around his table. I just love that.
Such an extraordinary vocation to be a father and to be a scientist. All right. So just any final thoughts, Ana, about your experience with the book or your hopes for the book? What's lingering that you'd like to say?
Well, I am excited to see how this book will get better known and spread out more as his cause, goes up. There are a lot of people praying to him already, especially people with special needs in their family. And also that Word on Fire has also taken another story I wrote. So that's, a lot of people ask me, what's next? So
yes.
Next year, that it's being illustrated now, and it's a story from Brazil. And I'll just say that, and we'll wait and see. It's a beautiful story from Brazil that every Brazilian knows, but there's no books about it here. So you will have a story of faith. So you will learn that when that one comes out.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Thank you, Ana Braga-Henebry. We're talking about your beautiful picture book, Jerome Lejeune, Saintly Geneticist. And that's coming from Word on Fire. It has already come from Word on Fire. We have the ordering link. We also have the link to our previous episode with you. Everyone, you'll enjoy it so much, How to Foster Religious Vocations in Your Homeschool. And we have the link to the Ignatius biography for teens and adults, Jerome Lejeune, A Man of Science and Conscience. And so we just thank you for making the time, especially when you're recovering from not being well, Ana. You're a trooper. Really love your heart, love your beautiful spirit. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. God bless you all.
And everybody, thank you for listening today. We're so happy to have you with us. We're praying for you. Please pray for us too. God bless you and have a beautiful day in the Lord. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you and thank you for joining us.